thank you as well to our partners, SAGE and Pride Center of Edmonton. Before I introduce the speaker, I wish to acknowledge that we are located on Treaty 6 territory and respect the histories, languages, and cultures of First Nations, Métis, Inuit, and all First Peoples of Canada, whose presence continues to enrich our community. Further, I should let you know that this session is being recorded for future use on our YouTube channel. If you don't wish your image to be recorded, please close your video link. Our speaker today is Michael Phair. Michael is well known to all of you, and I am not going to attempt to list all of his achievements, which incidentally include, with the late Sherry McKibben, the founding of Edmonton Pride Seniors Group, which is the parent of Aging with Pride. Rather, I think I can best summarize the breadth of Michael's work by saying that it has been truly transformative. Not only is the Edmonton queer community better and stronger for his efforts, the entire city has been enriched by him. Michael's topic today is Edmonton queer spaces. So over to you, Michael.
Thank you. And I'm going to, thank you, Larry, very much. And I'm going to share my screen because I have everything I want to say on the screen. And you should be seeing the screen now.
Yes.
Yes. And oops. All right. So thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here today with all of you and to have a chance to talk a little bit about queer spaces. And I'm going to go through initially just a little bit of what I'm going to try to accomplish. Then we'll actually look at some spaces. We'll look at them online, of course, but whatever. And that we'll get as close as we can. Oops. If you're interested in contacting me, that's it. And much of what I talk about is also contained within the Edmonton Queer History Project, which the website is there. And that has a lot more than we'll be talking about today. And I'll talk more about it, about the project as we go a little bit further. But I just wanted to kind of start with that. So this next slide is a little bit of the goals of this project and how I got involved. To bring us backwards a bit, in the early 2000s at the University of Alberta, primarily through the Institute of Sexual Minorities and Services, which Chris Wells was involved in there was the beginnings of a history project that was done. And that project, when that was undertaken, it was an opportunity at the university for Chris and other people to begin to put together some pieces of history, some of it around events. They also looked for written information that was available. They also did a number of videos and interviews with people that had been involved along the way. And that presentation took place, an officialized public presentation took place at the Alberta Art Gallery during Pride in, I think it was 2016, but I won't swear to which year that was. And that my memory fails. That's what happens when the gray stuff comes in, kind of thing. It kind of fails. It might have been a little bit before that. More recently, just before the pandemic actually started, just a couple months before, there was a small group of us that got together. I think 3 of us actually, or 4 maybe, over a coffee, and one of the persons, Jason, was the one who kind of pulled it together with an idea about doing some kind of event during Pride. Now, for the community, not during Pride. This was after the Pride Parade has decided it wasn't going to happen, and et cetera, and talked about another kind of public, just a one-off kind of event, and not during what would have been the Pride Week, some other time altogether, so that it wasn't an attempt to try to pretend it was taking on the Pride Parade in any fashion at all. Anyway, in that discussion, I had very recently gotten from Joe Cece, who is a member of the legislature from Calgary, who's a friend of mine, at my place, came to my place for dinner, I think. And he threw at me a map from Calgary that was called the Gay Calgary Map, kind of thing in that. Which I looked at and had some things about it were good. And so at this small meeting, I brought up that if we did some kind of event, we should also do something historical, and we should create a map. And I said, we could do better than Calgary's, which is pretty minimal in my opinion. I can say that because no one from Calgary's here, I think, today. So we started to move forward, both with kind of an event in which this map we were thinking about would be part of that, and some tours with it. As it turned out, it wasn't long before we were in the pandemic, and any outdoor event was gone. But as we met again and brought Chris Wells in from MacEwan, the notion of the maps took flight, kind of thing in that. And we, in Edmonton, there had been bus tours held during a number of years of Pride that Darren Hagan used to run, and he helped organize as well, that went around looking at different places, which a number of people came over the years, took those bus tours. I was on them with him most of the time. And those seemed to work kind of well, and did bring forward a fair bit of history at the same time. So we decided that at that time, Chris said that he could take over working with Darren. He could bring some other support of students that he had as well, and we could begin to look at it. I pushed hard that we wanted the map to look professional and really nice and all that kind of good junk kind of thing in that. So we also went out looking for a designer who would be able to do that, take our ideas and put it into a map, which really is what is the Edmonton project, history project, and the map that we've designed really has come out from that very initial work. And so just to emphasize, the goals of that walking map were, we wanted it to be a quality map. Chris at MacEwan built up a team that included a number of people, not just Darren, but the fellow who runs Evolution, and then a couple of other PhD students that he had that were interested in queer history, and they began building the information that has become part of the map and the website, and we wanted to identify real places and real stories, ensuring that the last 50 years in Edmonton were not lost. So both what we could find in records or in magazines or on Facebook, but also interviewing individuals or talking with people who had firsthand knowledge or been involved, depending what it was. And so there were personal stories and interviews and items that were written and put together, and they're all part of that website now, which is quite extensive. So the other points I'd make today is that some of what is part of looking backwards, is formal in terms of we talk about a place like Gate, whatever, and you can find records, etc. But a lot of it is informal as well. It's what people know or experienced, and that's always more difficult to capture. And I'll mention a little bit about that as we move a little further today, about being able to capture or the importance of the informal, how it really builds the context around what was going on. We also, in designing this project, it's all electronically online. It can be added to, which is one of the benefits of having the whole virtual world these days, is that it's relatively easy to add. And we've already added things that are not on the map, kind of thing, and that because of information that's come forward or people that have brought forward, kind of thing as well. It was also the intention so that it could be visited by anyone, not anyone who is gay or lesbian, or anybody else in the public could use the map or do it electronically as well. And the map allowed anyone to walk in that. Now, we've done a number of walks, we've organized kind of, but anybody can do it on their own with the map. They don't need to have anyone actually take the lead on it, but we've done some of those as well. So we wanted to make sure so that as many people as possible could look at our background. We also aim to capture some of the context of the times, what was going on that led to some of what we were happening. And I think that's an area that we've done not too badly. I think that's the context is always much more difficult to capture because it ends up being talking heads like you're getting today, and that's nowhere near as fun or it's interesting kind of thing in that. So with that, this talking head will move to the next one. So I'll talk about one of the very first organizations involved with gay and lesbian, which was GATE. This GATE was founded by Michael Roberts in 1971. In connection, actually, he was at the University of Alberta, along with a couple other fellows or persons. And they ran kind of an informal group at one of the, I think one of the houses that are right near the university that a couple of them lived in. And that Michael specifically had been in Vancouver, which had a GATE, which is Gay Alliance Towards Everyone, is what the letters stand for. And so he suggested that name, which incidentally ended up in Halifax as well, and a number of other cities. It's just interesting how that term GATE spread to other places, kind of thing, that too. I should mention that before 1971, there were certainly things that were going on, specifically at some of the hotels downtown. The big ones had bars that people, gay and lesbian members, well, gay men in one part and women in another part. They were separated by sex in those days, most of them. Usually in the back lounge, kind of by themselves, and on Friday or Saturday evenings, informally. They were not there officially. Bartenders certainly knew what was going on, and as long as no one caused any issue, they just kind of let them there because they were there drinking and paying, with money as well. And that's what bars are all about, is making money, really, kind of thing in that as well. However, GATE was the first attempt at an organization as such, and Michael was part of making that happen. There were house parties also that were taking place, and that's the informal stuff that's much harder to get to. I remember a couple of women on the south side, south of White Avenue, but closer to Bonnie Doon, in that area, who told me about house parties that they had for women, and that the police had to come a couple of times because the noise, racket, or whatever was being happening, and that. Uh, Women, some women just came because they knew about it, they heard about it. It was all informal. There was nothing formal about it, and I'm not sure how often some of these happened. On the north side, there was a place actually in the high rise, right near right near the hospital off of 101st, an apartment that a couple fellows were in, and they had parties quite often, is my understanding, again informally, and again raided by the police on a number of occasions because there was quite a bit of racket and a fair bit of alcohol around all over the place, I think. And they eventually those ended, but those kind of led to folks starting to say, we need something a little bit more than, informal parties that are just, they're fine, but that is that all there is? So Gate, in starting as they did, shortly about 72 or 73, moved into space in the on the south side on 109th kind of thing for a bit, and then in about 19 I think 68 or 9, they moved across the river, and this is their first office. You can see the word Gate in the window on the second floor of the Benson's building, kind of thing in that. And Gate played an extremely important role as a kind of today we would say kind of a social service organization. They had a library, they provided some counseling, they provided a place for people to drop in. They were open primarily in the evenings, and they developed some training, so to speak, so that there were usually hosts there who had been just trained a little bit to welcome people, and then the people who did some counseling had some background in it, and also some training that they would do. They soon outgrew that space and moved to this building, which did not look like this at this time, but was called the Phillips Lofts. It was moved into a space on the first floor. This building was essentially empty, with the exception that the only other entity in here was a place that stored furs. I'm talking about furs that women wore. That was, where they put them in there for the winter, or for the summer. Sorry, they would cook them out for the winter, kind of thing. In that, and I think that from my best understanding is they would take that from any number of women and stores. Certainly, a few of the stores that sold furs in those days, what they had left over, they would bring here to stay during the summer, and then they'd come and take them back. But so it wasn't an active place. It wasn't like there were people going in and out of there at all. The only people going in and out were those of us going to Gate. Gate flourished at that time, became probably the most significant organization in the city. Had a significant number of volunteers that did all of the kinds of things I've said. They had an organization where they had a board that they oversaw what was happening. They also, because they got no funding from anywhere, they then had to raise money, which they did primarily through dances. They did a few other kinds of things, but it was mainly dances, and they would hold them at different places in the city. I remember going to a couple places further up north near Chinatown. I can't even remember the names. They were like community halls. They weren't by a different association, that halls that could be rented, kind of thing in that. And the dances would be held there, and would be open to anyone that wanted to come to them. And they would be advertised by Gate and other organizations that might be around at that time, eventually through the bars that started to come about as well. And so I think that during the period of into the late 70s and 80s, GATE was probably the most significant gay lesbian organization in the town, other than the court. But GATE, I think that many young people that came to Edmonton at that time found their way to GATE. It was the only one that was kind of there and around that people knew something about. And so many people walked in wanting to know where things were. A lot of the counseling was about what it was like to be gay and lesbian, and young people were still dealing with that. It was close to the Greyhound station. A lot of them came by Greyhound, Darren Hagen being one of them, kind of thing in that. But many others came that way. Many from the rural areas. There's always been a significant influx of queer people from smaller parts of Alberta ending up in Edmonton, kind of thing in that. And so GATE played a really pivotal role, I think, in working with and assisting hundreds, if not thousands, of people as they came to Edmonton. And I think that was part of it. But as I said, they were also involved in other things. This was their Halloween dance that they sponsored. This is probably about 84, 5, something like that. I'm not quite sure of the photo didn't have a date on. I recognize a number of people there, although I can't tell you the names. I don't think of anybody, partly because some of the costumes hide quite a bit. Some of the rest of you might recognize some of the ones there. It's also interesting and the informal part a bit, because the costumes they're wearing are of a certain era as well. And those of you who are older will recognize some of this kind of thing. The group of 4 that are the woman with the 2 there, the 2 guys in the helmets and the uniform a bit. The space head and the one, God almighty, some of the stuff that they're wearing kind of thing. And that is, it depicts a certain time as well. I can't imagine going to a Halloween party looking like this, anybody looking like this these days, kind of thing in that too. And the one I remember going to myself, I dressed it as Billy, it was a Billy Clobber, who was a character on CBC radio, who was supposedly a hockey guy who was completely off. But I wore shoulder pads. I also wore skates, and I wore stuff over my head so that people actually didn't recognize me initially, nor did they figure out what character I was either. I mean, but anyway, I remember doing that and going to the Halloween party. The other memory that I would share, and again, this is all informal. This is the kind of thing that help give a better sense of the context. Because this was all volunteer run, it was all set up by volunteers. GATE had to get a liquor permit, and then we had to go to the liquor store to order the liquor, and then we had to pick it up and then take it here. And then we had to have people who were registered, or whatever the term was, that could then, sell it, pour it, et cetera, and that, et cetera. And then at the end of the evening, of course, we had to clean up. And my roommate at the time, John Brock, who was part of GATE right from very early on, and I usually were part of the cleanup, and we usually took the liquor that was left and the empties, because we had to return all that as well, kind of thing in that. And so one of the nights that we did that during the summer, by the time things were done and cleaned up and we were packing all of the stuff in my car, kind of thing, that it was probably 3:30 or 4 in the morning, kind of thing in that. And it was light, it was midsummer. And as we were driving back to my place with all this liquor, both filled and opened, kind of thing in that, and empty, and that at one of the stoplights, a police car rolled alongside of us. And John saw it first. He said, I don't want to tell you, but there's a police car right next to us. And I'm like, oh my God. However, we got through the light. We got home safe and sound, took everything inside my place for the night. And the next day, put it all back in my car and took it all back. I mean, that was part of being a volunteer and doing these kind of things. And I think that's part of the context that sometimes we miss, not miss, but we kind of forget how all that was done by people as volunteers through those years. So that was one, but the Gate survived on dances in those days. That's where they made their major money. So the next one I want to spend just a bit of a moment on is Club 70, which was the first gay lesbian bar in town. And it was founded by a nonprofit group made up of gays and lesbians, a society with a board. And they rented space in this building in the basement, where you see the two men walking. That's actually 109th Street. It was around the corner. Oh no, am I wrong? Anyway, it was in the basement here somewhere. That's a room in the basement. And Miller Pub was there, and you see what the building used to look like. It's torn down now, and that was 1969. And many know the story that rather than call themselves Club 69, because of what that might connote, they called the Club 70 because it was close to the end of the year, and they didn't want to use the term 69 for obvious reasons. So, and they were only open on weekends. You had to be notified whether it would be open, because besides volunteers, they had to get a liquor license every week, kind of thing, every time they wanted to be open in that. And so on occasion, they weren't able to get a liquor license either because it was too slow, or whatever would happen. So you got a phone call to tell you that it was going to be open. And there were a number of people who had partial numbers to call to let them know. And interestingly, I've seen that list. It's now in the City of Edmonton archives, and it has like nearly 300 names on it and phone numbers. But when I was shown it by one of the people involved at that time, went through a number of names and said, "Oh, that's not their real name. They didn't use that in their real name, but the phone number was correct," because people didn't want to be known by their real name. So they changed their name, but they had the right phone number, because that's the only way they knew. So it was only there for a couple of months, and the owner found out who this group was and then locked them out. And so midnight one night, a pickup truck and a couple of the fellows came. Actually, I think it came and broke in the door and took out most of the stuff that belonged to them. And then they eventually went to and got their deposit back. They went to court and got their deposit back, the kind of thing that as well. So that building was just torn down 2 years ago. It's on the corner of 109th and 106th, and that was short-lived. And so this is the inside. This is a photo from inside where Club 70 was. And these two people dancing are Doug Wilson in the striped shirt and Pat Fortier in the white shirt. And that's what the place inside looked like. You can't see, there was a little place where the bar was set up, and then the phonograph and records, vinyl records, were over in another corner, kind of thing in that. And I think you can't see behind the guy in the Pat in the white shirt, I think is kind of a speaker that's in that corner, kind of thing that as well. It's also interesting because Pat Fortier eventually ended up owning and running Boots and Saddles, which was an outgrowth of Club 70 many years later, kind of thing. That also of interest is that the society. Well, actually, I'll move on to that one. The society, and I know you can't really read this, but this is the minutes from just after their opening meeting and the rules they had, and the upcoming election they were going to have. And the second chairperson, when it became Club 70, or when it moved, was a woman who was actually the chair for the next couple of years, kind of thing, because this was clearly involved. It clearly involved men and women. And interesting, when you look at who was elected, it just has the first initial of each name and then the last name. So it takes a bit of sleuthing to figure out whether we're women or men, kind of thing. That one of the other board members was Dow Hicks, which I was amazed at. I didn't realize that's who it was, kind of thing. And that who went on to found the Roost eventually, grew out of that. And I never realized he'd been involved in this way back in the early days. And so we have that information is interesting. What the board was looking at, the rules they thought they had to make for the club, who could get in. It's just fascinating to read what the context of those times was, what that meant. So here's where they moved to, and Club 70 was here in this building, which is now Latitude 53 on 106 between 102nd and 102nd, 103rd, kind of thing in that on the west side of the block, and Club 70 lasted until about 1976, 77. And at that time, you had the club became a private club owner, and the Roost was also in existence by that point as well as another private club. The other one right across the street from the Roost, also I forget the name at the moment. It was getting ready to open as well. Yes, right. And so thanks. But Boots and Saddles stayed open until the early 2000s. It had a different name initially, and then became Boots and Saddles for the longest period of time, and then it changed its name towards the end, the last few years, because it closed, and then it was taken over by a couple of women who ran it for the last couple of years before it disappeared entirely, and it has a long history. One of the interesting parts is that on the roof, which you can't see here, there was a bit of a balcony, not a balcony, but a garden up there, and a space that they put out some chairs in that. I'm sure it was completely illegal. The little walk space on the stairs to get there would have been impossible for almost anyone in a wheelchair. Anybody that had difficulty, and they would carry up booze up there, and I'm sure that was illegal. And it would be outside there on nights that were warm, kind of thing, and you could hear some of the noise going on, kind of thing, that if you were careful. But I having been a member of city council, I know that would have never been approved, kind of thing, that no one knew, that the city had no inclination. It was never on any development permit or whatever. They just did it, kind of thing, and that as well. There were a lot of drag queen events here as well at Boots and Saddles. Then I'm going to go on to Edmonton Queer Space, which is a little different kind of space. It's not a queer space as such, like the clubs were, because we're really talking about City Hall, and we are in thinking about this. Primarily, we're getting into the end of the 80s and into the 90s, kind of thing, and that it was going on. Because through Gate and then through Gala, which was around at that point, there were attempts to have, and there were Pride weeks that took place, and there were letters sent to the city hall, to the mayor and council, to proclaim Pride, and that was turned down by early mayors and members of council, and a number of them making, the kind of quotes that, were awful, kind of thing. One of them said something about, they never happened here. I'd moved to Australia. So we did a little thing about, we hope they did. There were lots of sheep there. He'd be just fine, kind of thing. And that other little things like that we did. But it was refused as such until 1993. I think I've got my when Mayor Reimer was the mayor, and she did do a thing about gay in the city as part of the at that time the Pride Week had a booklet that it was given out of the different events, and also if you filled in, there was some prize you could get at the end or something. I can't remember exactly that as well. But she provided a letter on behalf of the city to Pride to that, and that was one of the first times that there was an official recognition from the city. In '93 and '94, there was a proclamation from the mayor by Jan Reimer. In 90, I'm wrong on that. The years are a little bit earlier. In 1989 and 1990, Jan proclaimed it. In 19 then a little later, and then further on, yes. And then in 1993, Jan was on holidays, and the acting mayor was Sheila McKay, and she would not issue it, and that. So we did not get one. The next year when Jan was back, we did again, and then we've gotten proclamations for a number of years after that. I was on the city council at that time, and was always did some work with her office in between that time, or about the proclamation. But that was one of the first things that finally happened at the city. One of the other big things that happened, that those of you who were involved would remember, is that in Edmonton, there had, in Canada, there was the growth of choruses, of gay lesbian choruses. And in Edmonton, the Edmonton vocal minority was the gay chorus in town in Edmonton, both men and women. And there was a national organization that every 2 years, I think, held a festival kind of thing, and that choruses coming from across the country. There would be workshops, and then they do a number of concerts, et cetera, et cetera. And so the local group sponsored it in 1998, with the major events taking place at City Hall. And that was the first time that many of us are aware of where there were specifically gay lesbian events that took place at City Hall, like other groups have done ever since the new City Hall was built. It was unique in that groups that came from other cities, and Vancouver and Toronto and Halifax and Saskatoon, Hamilton, I can't remember. I think there were about 14 or 15 cities that were here. None of them could believe that we could do this would be done in City Hall. And it was approved and recognized. And so there were things that, and the final concert always was where all of the groups would do some stuff together. And that was open to the public. Anyone could come, kind of thing in that. And there were a couple hundred people in the audience, kind of thing in that. And it was a huge success, kind of thing in that. And partly because the setting of not only singing as people wanted to do and having a good time with the other people, et cetera, and that, but also the setting that it was in. Most of you have been in City Hall, so you know that main room is filled with sunlight and light. It's a really lovely space to be in, and I think that combined that it was a City Hall, and we read a proclamation, and I think I read the proclamation at that time. For that. So that was 1998 that took place. Also connected with City Hall, and this is Mayor Mandel way over on the right. Oh, and I'm in there too somewhere. And so is a few other folks that probably some of you would know as well, because this would have been this was the first Pride the Camp Firefly mayor's breakfast, brunch, I guess, or breakfast, whatever we called it, brunch, I think, I don't know, breakfast back then. This was the very first one, and it was done when Mayor Mandel agreed to do it and announce it. Again, it was the Institute of Sexual Minority Studies and Services and Chris Wells and others there who were behind this, and they had met with me, and Chris and myself, and I think somebody else went to meet with Mandel about possibly interested in something like this, and he agreed to be the sponsor of the very first one. And my memory is that we held it at the Legion on 112th, at the corner of 112th and 83rd, the Legion Hall. We had I think that's where we held it. I may be wrong at the location, kind of thing. But these were some of the people that helped to organize and to run it. That volunteers, a couple of people, well, the mayor and a couple of us who were political were, kind of volunteers, but the others did the work, so to speak, and that too. But that was, an official a function of the mayor of the city of Edmonton, kind of thing. It took it to another level, in my opinion, altogether. That was there. One of the other informal things that I wanted to mention, as I'm moving along fairly quickly, that doesn't get recognized, and it's the kind of thing that's tough to do, is when I was at City Council, I had a couple of people who were employees of the city that were meeting with me, saying that they wanted to have same-sex benefits for their spouse or their partner as others under that. So, which I knew nothing about, which I went about finding. And then what was told was that the city would not implement that. That was part of bargaining negotiations. The unions had to apply for it as part of the bargaining. And so went back to these fellows and said, you have to get something going on within your unions to bring it forward, which they did with some others. It came forward that next year as part of the bargaining between the city and administration and them. And what came to City Council was that it was the administration was recommending that it be adopted as part of the bargaining about the new for the next year. And they indicated it was practically no cost, and all of council approved that as part of the agreement. And that, so the city of Edmonton had benefits for same-sex partners probably before almost any other entity in the city, kind of thing. And that it was quite an occasion. But it's one of those little things that isn't documented kind of anywhere. And all this negotiating was in private, of course, and nothing. And same with council. The meeting when council approves it, the union negotiations is all in private, so nothing gets recorded, kind of in that regard either. So it'll probably, no one will know. Once a couple of us are gone, no one will know. So that's when we talk about some of the private stuff that we don't always know. So moving along fairly quickly, we're on to finally some comments or questions. I'm particularly interested any questions you have, or whether you've got some things you might be able to share that you recall thinking back over the last 50 years. And I'll stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Michael. Either the electronic symbol or simply raise your hand if people do have questions. Jan, you're muted, but.
I just had a comment on the Club 70 and the picture that you had of the two men dancing. And I thought that for a gay party, there was way too much lighting and there was very little decorations on the wall.
You're right, Jan. And I suspect that was a picture taken purposely so people could see what the place looked like.
Michael, I was here, if I may make a comment. I was here for the early part. I sort of came out in 67, 68. And what I remember is how nearly impossible it was to find any information about where gay men went and so on. And Mike, the way in which I found some of these very hidden places, I've told you, but I'm not sure I've told the others. I happened to be on a bar, and I was a student at that point in a bar on White Avenue, and I went to the men's room, and someone had written there on the wall, "Where do the fags go in Edmonton?" And lo and behold, someone had answered it. I was into the Royal George, which was one of those very hidden but nearly gay bars the next night, and never looked back. But just the importance of getting information out and so on, and a lot of this stuff really will be lost unless projects like the Edmonton Pride History group.
Good. Thanks. Joan, you had your hand up, I saw.
Yeah, I first came out in Red Deer, and there was this association called GARD, Gay and
Yes.
Lesbian
Yes.
Association Red Deer, and they often spoke of GATE. GATE was who we said, look, it's possible to do what we're doing, because somebody in the group had dealings with GATE in Edmonton. So they were kind of our mentor in a way. And I remember eventually getting to the city and just, going, and I think GATE had a newsletter out for a while.
Yeah.
I remember picking it up in bookstores and whatnot, and just, it was like a beacon, but they set a really nice path for so many people afterwards, and it just went on from there. But the fear and the excitement, oh my God, I don't know if I could ever match that anymore. Now it's just also blasé, I wonder about that now.
But, and I do remember GARD as well. And thanks for bringing that up, because I was, and some of others, there was an attempt, and there was a kind of a provincial organization for a while, and I was involved with that a little bit as well, and knew about GARD, and I think came to some event or some meeting in Red Deer that GARD was hosting, and I think it was with some of the others like Calgary and that kind of thing, because it was, again, Edmonton was central. I don't remember anything about it anymore, nor any of the people. I do remember that there was like a little reception before we had dinner, I think, of that, and having a great time at that. I mean, we're all have been busy actually talking to each other, what's going on in your place, and perhaps acting a little foolish, whatever.
Well, that would have been funny to run into you, Michael, at those events.
Yes, yes.
For a while. Yeah, well, I don't think so. I think I would have remembered you, but they did have their own building for a while right on Ross Street, but then it just became house parties after that. And, it was my first experience being around other gay people. And I was so terrified of the women. I would just hang with the men all the time.
Thank goodness. Some of us needed that.
There was a connection between the bars, which were very hidden, and the house parties, because word always went through where the house party was going to be held. And one of the things I think we've lost from those early days was the unity and the sense of cohesion and being a single community.
Absolutely. It was so underground, right? That we really maintained our connections.
Yeah, it was.
Any other comments or questions or bits of memory? Archie, welcome.
I've just not recently, but I've been back in Edmonton for about the last 4 years, living in the East before that in Ottawa. But I was at Club 70 in the first building, and I do remember it being dark at night down below and lots of tables around. You sort of felt like in a subterranean cave or something. But after it closed and moved to the other spot, I spent many days with others painting those walls black. And that went on for some time. And then eventually I was a late bloomer too, came out 27 age. And that was my first really introduction to gay life here in Edmonton, even though I had been born here and been here up until 1973. And I was on the board, I believe, for at least 1 year. I'm just not too sure. I knew Dow Hicks, Roy Wilson. I remember Millie. I can remember sitting in the Mayfair bar way towards the back with a big table of a mixed table of men and women, gays and lesbian, and a few of the other watering holes too. So I have a little bit of the history in my background, and I was really interested to hear more about the more recent things because that all happened while I was away. So thank you.
Thank you, Archie, for sharing that. I remember the back of the Mayfair very well. I think it's must be the feeling of relief and almost exultation the first time I entered a gay bar, which happened then to be the Royal George. But finding the thing, I suppose, I'm not sure that today, when it's much more permissible, people can really understand the enormous relief and the fact of having found someone, followed a day later by, my God, what have I done? And the fear then that came in. It was a very different time.
Yes. And Archie, I remember those walls being all black in there as well. I didn't realize that you were that they hadn't been black when they moved it, that I was painted.
No, we were
for
painting it, yeah.
Oh.
And they also had black lighting at some
Yes, they did. Yes.
Yes, right. And I remember I worked behind the bar. I worked behind the entrance counter and various things. Yeah. It was a good time.
Yeah. And it was all volunteers.
That's right.
Yeah. I did that.
Do you remember the roost and all the Barbies hanging upside down from the ceiling?
Oh, yes.
And they had like pins. They look like masochistic and
yes.
I love that. I took pictures of that. I got special permission to go and take pictures of those. I have that photograph somewhere of all these Barbie dolls hanging upside down, all tied up and, handcuffed. And
Joan, you should collect them at some point and donate them to the City of Edmonton Archives. They got a lot of our stuff, and I keep encouraging people to do that. And that the archives are, 50 years from now, when people want to know what went on, most of us won't be there. So
I have sent some things there already.
Oh, good.
Yeah, and I will continue for sure.
Good. Great.
Michael, there's certainly another whole talk to be given about the area, about the early era of AIDS and the way men and women came together then, and the way in which the community learned its power. I'd love to hear you talk on that another time.
Sometimes, sure. Yeah, there's lots of history when you start that. Anyway, as we found out.
If there we still have 5 minutes of time to our allotted end, but if no one has any further questions or comments, Michael, I'll give you the last word, and then we'll close.
Yes, thank you, and I'm delighted to have the opportunity today. Encourage all of you to both look at the website, because there's a lot there and a lot of it you would find interesting. But also, if you know things or have things to contribute that are in some kind of written form or video or photos, and that the only way they're going to be saved is if they end up in archives, and so I encourage that. Or you can do your own recording online these days and put it into the archives or into the history part as well. because we're always looking to to continue to update it and to bring it forward, and it means, as I said at the beginning, we're looking for real people who did real things and at real places, and that they can talk about or put forward what they actually remember. It gives the context, and I think that's one of the parts that's important in all of it. Our looking backwards and forwards is the context of how and why this happened, and so encourage that. Otherwise, thank you. I was delighted to do it.
Thank you, Michael, and it really was a first-rate talk. And thank you as well to my colleagues for technical help, and thank you to all of you for attending. I hope we'll see you again next week when the speaker will be Macaulay Cassidy, who is a co-founder and seniors program director for Cyber Seniors. She will talk about creating spaces for LGBTQ2S plus seniors in the virtual world. So I hope you will all attend. So with that, I will Jan, you have a no. With that, we will close. Goodbye, all.
Bye-bye.
Peace.
Bye, everyone.